And a few days ago, our guest speaker fell and broke his leg for today. And again, I was getting ready to speak. But my daughter, Aurora, came up to me and she said, "Dad, do you want me to get up and talk?" I go, "Well, are you willing to?" And she goes, "Yeah, I'd be willing to." Let me tell you just a little bit before I bring her up. I'm very proud of her. So, last year, Aurora got diagnosed with autoimmune disease. And when we first found out, we were told she had scleroderma. We didn't know which kind. And there's two kinds. And one is fatal, and one is treatable, but not curable. And in meeting, we didn't know what she had, which one. And at that time, my church had a healing service, an anointing of the sick. And I brought her to it, and the priest blessed her. And then she went in a prayer group, and then she went off to her by herself, and she prayed by herself. And afterwards, there was a social, and this took place at Mission. So for all my Mission ladies over there, she came out after quite a long time, and she sat with me, and I said, "So did you pray for God to heal you?" And she said, "No. I prayed for Him to give me strength to get through this." My 14-year-old daughter taught me a lesson that day. So I asked her to prepare her story of the grief that she's gone through with her illness, because people go through grief in many ways, through a loss, through illness, through loss of a job, through many different ways. And she's actually got some tremendous insights, and she's 15 years old, and I'm just going to tell you, have the Kleenex ready. You're going to be in tears. This is my daughter, Aurora.
Oh, I have a lot to work up to now. Hi, my name is Aurora, as mentioned. And Charles is my father, Aurora Castiglia is my grandmother, and that 6-foot-something piano guy over there is my boyfriend. He usually doesn't bite, but don't touch his hair because he gets a little territorial about that. So. And that, if you couldn't tell, was my icebreaker joke to make talking in front of you all a little less nerve-wracking. My story is a long line of specialists, technical terms I have trouble pronouncing, uncooperative school teachers, a never-ending emotional roller coaster, and a tote bag full of pills. It's an adventure, but we all have those in our lives. Those complicated stories that we never actually thought to piece together. Those stories where you realize that maybe you weren't as good of health as you thought. Those stories where you sit back and say, "Wow, I did all of that and I am still kicking." This is one of those stories, I guess. I'm 15 years old right now, and I'm going into my junior year of high school. At the age of 8, my family and I began to notice bruise-like markings on my arm. After a trip to the pediatrician, we were assured that the markings were inactive, so, don't bother worrying. We didn't. Fast forward to 8th grade, and when I was at the ripe age of 13, smack dab in the wonderful whirlwind of puberty, I began to get extremely anxious. I've always been prone to anxiety, but it was becoming harder to control and causing serious problems in my school life. And as a perfectionist, A+ student, the down spiral of my grades only fueled this anxiety. And as I was going, the anxiety became so intense that I began throwing up every single morning for 6 months of that year, as well as much of freshman year. The doctors tossed around several theories, but none of them proved true. Now, remember when we were told not to worry about those markings on my arm? Well, around the time that I began to get nauseous in the mornings, the blotches on my arm began to spread, and they turned from a light brown to a deep purple, and they began to indent on my skin. At this point, my parents and I decided to bypass my pediatricians altogether and got an appointment with the dermatologist, a skin doctor. After a few months of waiting, we finally got in, and the first thing my dermatologist does is take a biopsy of one of the blotches and make us go for a blood test. And she told us to come back a week later. We did as we were told, and one fun-filled week later, we were back in the dermatologist's office. Very clearly and very bluntly, she informed us that I had scleroderma, which we learned was linear, and some sort of autoimmune disease such as lupus. For those who aren't familiar with autoimmune diseases or simply don't know much about them, they're a type of chronic illness where the immune system attacks the body. The linear scleroderma is a special kind of autoimmune disease where the body creates too much collagen, a protein that makes up the connective tissue. That is, of course, the scientific way to say it. The easy explanation is that the person's skin, or sometimes their organ tissue, and the dark black purple blotches will begin to form, and as they grow, they eventually make the skin feel denser, and the blotches will begin to indent, as well as spread to other areas of the body. If left untreated, these indentations will push into the bones, or if they are internal, into your organs, and cause very serious problems. Regular scleroderma is often terminal, but thankfully my case is linear and can be treated. The treatment is very rough, but it will eventually get a lot easier for me. And honestly, since a year ago, it already has. Right after the initial diagnosis, we were told to go to a specialist known as a rheumatologist to clarify more about my disease. Thankfully for me, there's such a professional, Dr. Calkins, in the village of Hamburg near my mom's home. After more thorough examinations and more trips for blood tests, we learned that I do in fact have linear scleroderma with autoimmune characteristics as well as non-rheumatoid arthritis. The constant nausea in mornings was due to anxiety caused by my body as a way to show that things weren't working right internally. That's when all the prescriptions began to enter my young 14-year-old life. Methotrexate, a mild kind of chemotherapy taken once a week to suppress my immune system, while the prednisone, a kind of steroid that I take daily, tries to strengthen and patch together that suppressed immune system. Every day that I don't take the methotrexate, I take folic acid, a vitamin B to keep the chemo from damaging my system. The rest of the pills were to help either stop my throwing up, stop the constant fatigue from the chemo, stop the vitamin D levels from dropping, and stop the pain in my joints from the arthritis. And on top of that, there were also a handful of lotions and creams prescribed by the dermatologist. I was given a large amount of these medications in hope that we can fix the problems quickly while my body can still handle it. From here, we were sent to more doctors for a wide variety of tests to assure that my major organs, such as my lungs, my esophagus, and my heart, were not affected as well. So there was another few weeks of ultrasounds and breathing tests and glass chambers and x-rays and one very, very gross chalk milkshake. I don't recommend it. This brings me to my final professional that I was advised to visit, Mrs. Kells. All of my doctors were extremely kind. They were never condescending to me or treated me as if I was an overreacting child or just another patient. I felt like an equal to all of them, and they all helped me immensely on this journey, working hard as they could to help my physical ailments. But one that I usually try to avoid mentioning is Mrs. Kells. Maybe I don't always see the relevance of mentioning her, or maybe it's just out of embarrassment. Mrs. Kells is my counselor. She works with me on the mental and emotional aspects of my disease and helps me stay sane through all of it. Because honestly, I often felt that the treatment was more difficult to handle than the actual disease. The chemotherapy made me physically fatigued, while the steroids made my brain move quicker, and I routinely had a panic attack every day at 5th period right before lunch and had to excuse myself to go to the bathroom. This all, of course, made my school life, again, very difficult, and some of the teachers had trouble grasping that there was something wrong when I had decent grades and I looked fine. It was difficult being handled like I was lying to get out of work by some of them, and then being treated like I was about to break at any second by others. And then there were the physical side effects. Before the medication, I was underweight due to the constant nausea. but from the steroids, I quite literally gained 20 pounds in a month. Not fun. And let me tell you, all went to my cheeks, like I got the chipmunks. I don't look at pictures from a year ago, let me tell you that. And God, the breakouts that came, oof. Adolescence is difficult for all teenagers, but all of these things happening in my first year of high school was pushing me to the breaking point. I cried all the time, and I didn't know why, and I felt lost, and above all, I felt completely alone. And Mrs. Kells helped me through that time. Together we worked on identifying my feelings and articulating them to my parents. She helped me a lot with my self-image, which was deteriorating. We worked on calming techniques when I felt anxious, and techniques to help me when I felt depressed, and techniques in general to keep me mentally and emotionally healthy. She helped me realize how many people in my life were there for me, all of those people who were trying to help me and trying to understand. Mrs. Kells did what was near impossible. She showed me how many people care about me. And sometimes that's extremely embarrassing to say, that I needed a counselor to do something as simple as show me that my parents didn't always see me as a bother or a burden. But I couldn't do it on my own. I think that the hardest thing for me was realizing that I couldn't do it on my own, that I needed help. That's a hard thing for everyone, I think, realizing that you need help or a crutch, because we are always taught that independence deserves to be lauded, and dependence is clingy and burdening. You are not a burden for not being able to do something on your own, especially when it comes to your mental and emotional health, be it the loss of a loved one, a newly discovered obstacle, or just life. You don't have to do something alone to seem strong. The strongest thing a person can do is admit that they need help from someone, because for some reason we are taught that our mental and emotional health comes second to our physical and social health, which I find really silly, because depression often makes simple tasks like taking a shower or doing dishes or seeing friends or even reading a favorite book seem impossible. If your mental and emotional health are strong, the rest will follow. It takes a while for that healing process to take noticeable effect, but the weight off your shoulders will leave you breathless. My obstacles, be it my illness or my nausea or my anxiety or my depression, were all caught before they could become life-threatening issues. I am by far not an extreme case of any of these things, but I did go through them. That does not make my challenges unworthy of care, and that does not make my worries obsolete. I don't like a lot of sympathy or worrying to come my way personally, but that doesn't mean that I don't look back and know that those were some of the hardest times of my life that has only just begun. All of us have these stories. The stories that when you piece them all together, you realize the full complexity of the situation and the struggle that you had been or are currently going through due to one or more of these four healths: emotional, mental, social, and physical. So what do you do with these stories? It's simple. You grow. You recognize that you had hard times. But look at you. You're still here, and you have so many more stories to go through, no matter what your age. You can keep going on through whatever comes your way, and if you need help, you ask for it, because it will make a world of a difference. Oh, you have hard stories and sad stories and happy stories and small stories and big stories, and they all make you. Stories about how you felt, what you thought, who you saw, and what you did. Emotional, mental, social, and physical. Stories about your health. We all have stories. Don't let yours grow dusty on the shelves. Read and grow and heal. And one day you'll be able to help others too.